I remember seeing the first Guardians of the Galaxy movie in theaters. Back then, no one really knew who these characters were or why they should care about them. Going into the theater, I remember feeling uneasy, like I was about to waste 2 hours of my time watching untested sludge just because it had a Marvel logo on it. But then I saw it, and it was great. From that first moment Star-Lord sings to himself in the cave, to the final dance battle distraction, it was a great movie. My theater gave it a standing ovation, and the rest of the world liked it too. These characters became superstars, each member of the team now a household name, all because of how good their movies were and how lovable these characters were. And I need you to understand all of that so that you know how serious it is when I say that the version of the team from the 2021 Guardians of the Galaxy video game is so good that they have completely replaced the film version in my mind as the definitive version of the team. That's how much I like these guys, that's how much I like this game. I've played through Guardians twice now on PS4 and PS5. Get the PS5 version if you can, performance is way better. The footage you'll be seeing of me is from the PS5 version. Just had to say that for the sake of transparency. I will be discussing spoilers, though I have kept spoilers contained within the story section, which is timestamped, if you want to avoid spoilers, and feel free to skip past that section. Now then, here's my thoughts on 2021's Guardians of the Galaxy. Let's start with the weakest part of the game, which is its gameplay. This is a narrative-focused game, and I really do mean that. The narrative is the focus, and the gameplay definitely suffers as a result. I'm not even talking about the combat, not yet anyway. A pretty significant problem with this game is that there is a lot of just walking around. Nearly half your game time will be taken up by walking. Some of this is spent exploring areas and moving through missions, but a lot of this walking will be walk and talk bits that are essentially glorified, unskippable cutscenes. So if you're the type of person who values gameplay over story and absolutely hates this kind of thing, then this game might not be for you. That being said, I am that type of person, and this game still worked for me. This is largely due to the story being really good, to the point that I didn't mind this stuff that much. In this game, you play as Star-Lord, and only Star-Lord. This was a huge point of contention when the game was first coming out, because people wanted to play as the other members of the team. But personally, I was always fine with just Star-Lord. He's the leader of the team, so it makes the most sense to play as him. And the other members really aren't that interesting either. Both Drax and Gamora are people with swords, Rocket is another guy with a gun, and Groot is the only one with a genuinely interesting set of abilities. Now, I know a lot of people are probably thinking, hold on, isn't Star-Lord just another guy with a gun? How is he more interesting? Well, this game wisely chose to incorporate one of the coolest parts about Star-Lord that was bizarrely missing from the films, which is his elemental blasters. His guns being able to shoot different elements like fire and lightning, in addition to the typical lasers, opens up a lot of possibilities for the character. It also makes me intensely dislike any other version of the character that doesn't do this, because this is such a cool gimmick and they're just leaving it on the table. There are 4 elemental shots in this game, and you get them by progressing the story. Ice is the first and does what you'd expect, freezing people. Electricity is the second and by far the best, being able to damage and stun multiple enemies at once. Wind has one singular function of pulling enemies close to you. And then there's fire, which is great for damaging more tanky enemies. With all of that and Star-Lord's basic abilities, you'd think he'd be super OP, but he's not. Your role as Star-Lord is to chip away at enemies and open them up so that you can do the real damage with your teammates. Each member of the team has a total of 4 abilities that you can command them to do. 3 normal abilities and a super one you unlock after pivotal moments in the story. Generally, each character has their own focus. Rocket damages crowds, Groot stuns and restrains enemies, Gamora has high single target damage, and Drax fills up enemy stagger bars. But there is more variety in their additional skills, so that gives you more toys to play around with. I'm happy with how this system works. You still get to sort of control the other members, so in a way you are still playing as the whole team. In a sequel that this game is definitely not getting, I think that a character switch system like Final Fantasy VII Remake would be a good way to make the combat even more diverse, even if I personally don't think it's necessary. And if you want to directly control Rocket or Groot right now, there is a game for that. If you want to play as Gamora or Drax, tough luck. Combat in Guardians is generally pretty good, but it's not like great. There are problems, big and small, that hold this back. I'll go through them in ascending order, ending with the biggest issue. But first, let me say something positive. One of my favorite things about combat, which is that I really like the dodge. Star-Lord's dodge feels great. You press that button and he moves. It's snappy and fast, but not spammable. Alright, now let's get complaining. To fire Star-Lord's guns, you need to press and hold the fire button. There is a significant delay from when you press the button and when he starts firing. So much so that if you just tap the button, then Star-Lord will take his guns out, but not fire. The charge shot looks cool, but feels kinda limp, and the input is weird. Star-Lord's guns already require you to hold the button to fire them, so the charge shot requires a double tap and hold, which is just strange. Maybe it's just me, but this functioning differently to literally every other charge shot I've ever used didn't feel good. One of Star-Lord's abilities is a rapid-fire barrage that is really cool, but it's a little low in damage and it lasts a bit too long. There were quite a few moments where I'd bust this thing out like, yeah, take that, but then after a while the attack would just keep going, and it's like, alright dude, you can stop now. Something I think was poorly handled is the huddle. This is basically the super mode mechanic of the game. There's a meter that charges up during combat, and when it's full, you can call a huddle with the other members of the team. The idea here is that you regroup, sort out how the team is feeling, and return to combat re-energized. But in practice, this ability is very limp. To start with, the huddle itself takes way too long. Taking what feels like a 2-minute break in the middle of combat is so tedious. For this reason alone, I didn't want to use it. The huddle is also too linear and simple. See, you have to gauge how the team is feeling and pick an appropriate response to boost the full team. If you choose incorrectly, only Star-Lord gets the boost. But there will only ever be two different options. Either the team is overconfident and you need to pick the option that reins them in, or they're overwhelmed and you need to pick the option that pumps them up. So after using this ability twice, you will never be surprised by it ever again. The best part about the huddle is when you activate it, it plays a song from the game's massive music library. But I think you should be able to curate the selection of songs available for the huddle, because some of these songs are just not suitable for high energy combat. If I had to give a suggestion to make this ability better, it would be to cut out the huddle thing entirely, and have the choice be to play music through headphones to boost only Star-Lord, or through a speaker system to boost the other members. Because the music playing is the best part of this, so I'd lean into that more. Another problem with combat is that things can get a bit spammy when it comes to the abilities. While there are a variety of abilities that do different things, and you can pay attention to that and try to play as strategically as possible, you can also just spam things out as quickly as you get them and you'll probably be fine. In longer fights, I definitely found myself devolving into a random BS go mentality just to get through them. Finally, the biggest issue of combat is a lack of enemy variety. There are a lot of different enemy types, but you hardly fight a mix of them at the same time. Enemy encounters are usually dictated by the environment you're in, and different environments have specific selections of enemies. There are exceptions to this, typically in the game's final missions, but generally enemy variety in combat is low, and as a result, encounters can feel a bit boring. Another part of gameplay that I completely forgot about and had to add in here later is ship gameplay. In select moments, you can pilot the Milano, and it's okay. The ship controls well enough. These sections are short and simple, offering fun variety without overstaying their welcome, but not being good enough to leave a lasting impact. Like I said, I had to add this bit in later. I completely forgot to put this in the first time I wrote the script. Before discussing the story, I think it's worth talking about the characters, because they're really good here. This game features a strong supporting cast as well, but I really want to call attention to the Guardians team, because they're the whole reason all of this works so well. My favorite of the main cast has to be Drax. Dave Bautista's Drax in the MCU was a really funny and cool character. In the first Guardians movie, and nowhere else, he quickly became a bad parody of himself in later entries, far too focused on humor to the point that the heart of the character was lost, only visible in very brief, occasional moments. If you feel the same way and wish that Drax was more like his portrayal in the first Guardians movie, then you will also love Drax here. He's the full package, funny, serious, cool, and wholeheartedly believable in his pain and compassion. Gamora is the character that surprised me the most. I think it's really easy for Gamora to fall into the trap of being the serious one. The problem with being the serious character on a team is that the serious one doesn't feel like they really belong with the other members. They're constantly frustrated with them, it just feels like they don't want to be there, and really the biggest issue is that this sort of character can end up being pretty boring. But Gamora isn't like that. Even from the beginning, it's clear that she's a lot more human and normal than you might expect. She's perfectly capable of cracking jokes and being vulnerable, so she really feels like she belongs with the others. She has plenty of serious character work to her. Her near breakdown close to the end of the game is an emotional highlight, not just for her, but for the entire game. She's just a really solid, believable person, and I really liked her. I think it's also worth noting that unlike her MCU counterpart, this Gamora is not a love interest for Star-Lord. This prevents her from just being the girlfriend, which also helps her stand on her own a bit more and feel like a more natural inclusion on the team. Groot certainly is Groot. There isn't a whole lot to say about the guy. He definitely gets the short end of the stick here, but I still like him. He's the nice, reliable one on the team, and he fills the role well. Rocket is mostly what you'd expect from the character. He's the jerk of the team. He's inconsiderate, abrasive, and sometimes flat out mean. But the game makes it very clear very early on that he has a heart and that he's capable of being kind to the people he cares about. Star-Lord is the main character, the one you play as, so it's important for him to be good. And he is. Mostly. The biggest distinction between this Star-Lord and his MCU counterpart is the fact that this guy is the leader of the team. Sure, MCU Star-Lord says he's the leader, but he's not. He hardly gives out orders, and when he does, they're usually ignored, as his team tends to do whatever they want. Game Star-Lord is the leader. He tells the team to do something, and they do it. There's usually a fair amount of complaining, but they do it. It's something I didn't even realize I took issue with in the MCU, but seeing these guys listen to Star-Lord and actually ask him for commands made me realize what was missing from the MCU version. But if I had to pick which character was the weakest of the Guardians, it would have to be Star-Lord. This isn't to say that he's bad, I do like him, but he is the weakest link here. I've got two problems with him. The first is that I think the character is written to be a bit too dim-witted and goofy. This guy is supposed to be really charismatic. Among other things, he was able to talk out Rocket and Groot from collecting a bounty on his head and convince them to join up with him. That sounds like a really impressive and charismatic guy. But that side of the character rarely appears. Instead, Star-Lord spends far too much time in this game bumbling around and being the team idiot. It's a shame because whenever the story gets more serious, I think he really shines. I just wish there was more of that and less of the goofball. The second issue is his voice. I don't think the voice actor did a bad job here, but I do think he was maybe miscast. Sometimes you can tell that he's doing a voice, especially whenever he has to yell. It just, I don't know, it feels like he's laying it on a bit too thick. Now let's discuss the story. This is the spoiler section of the video, so I'll give you a few extra seconds to click off or skip ahead. Okay, Guardians of the Galaxy centers around a relatively young version of the team, one that's just starting out. Star-Lord, Rocket, and Groot were the founding members, with Gamora and Drax coming along afterwards. This means that while they are a team, they don't fully trust each other yet, something they obviously work on over the course of the game. I like this setup since it puts us in the middle of things while still being an origin story. It also creates an immediate difference from the movies, where the team forming and getting close to each other happened all at once in bombastic fashion. while in this version, the formation of the team was something more mundane, and their grander heroics came later. Another part of the setup for this game's story is that the galaxy is still recovering from a massive war. They don't go too deep into specifics, but it seems to have been Thanos and the Chitauri versus everyone else. A lesser game would have the war as a background detail, maybe something they could use to mine Easter eggs, like, oh, Bing Fardo was there, you know him, right? But here, the war isn't just a thing that happened, it's an important event that has affected nearly every character. It's something that helps the world feel larger than just the slice of it we're seeing through the main cast. The main plot of the game has the Universal Church of Truth, led by Grand Unifier Raker, try to take over the galaxy by using something called the Promise, a false reality where people are given something they strongly desire. In the game, we only see this being used as a way to restore lost loved ones, but they do mention that each person's promise is tailor-made to them, so there could be other things people want. Once a person is ensnared by the promise, they become enslaved followers of the church. The Guardians work together to stop the Promise from sweeping the galaxy, while working on their personal issues as well. And boy do they have issues. Star-Lord's life has been tough since his mother was killed in front of him and he was taken as a child to a Chitauri prison. He also has history of Nova Corps Centurion Corell. For much of the game, he believes that Corell's daughter, Nikki, may be his daughter as well, a thought that forces him to heavily reevaluate his life and priorities. Though at the end, it is revealed that Nikki is neither his nor Corell's, as she was an orphan of the war. Star-Lord also has the thread about taking responsibility for both his role in releasing Magus, more on that later, and for Nikki. Nikki is incredibly important to the story. She's chosen as the matriarch of the Church of Universal Dickheads. She's also the one who will usher in the Promise across the whole galaxy. This means it's not just about saving the galaxy, but the team has a personal stake in trying to save her as well. Nikki swallowed the Promise wholesale because it means she can be with her mom again. Getting her to accept her mom's death and let go of the guilt she feels over it is both the team's main goal and one of the central themes of the game. Gamora has a lot of hang-ups. Being the daughter of Thanos, she's seen firsthand how men in power twist young girls into instruments of their own cause, so she's immediately invested in saving Nikki. Gamora killed her own sister Nebula because she was corrupted to the point of no return, and it's this exact fate she desperately wants to avoid for Nikki. Gamora has an interesting angle of her issues here, as her deal isn't about accepting someone's death, but instead about how she's kept it a secret from the other members of the team. The scene where she actually tells them is one of the best parts of the game. Drax lost his family to Thanos' invasion and never really recovered from it. Because of this, he's the only member of the Guardians to actually succumb to the Promise, becoming a brainwashed flunky the rest of the team has to save. We actually go into his head to see his Promise, where he's been reunited with his wife and daughter. We also see how Thanos remains as an eternal threat within Drax's mind, and we get to fight him. The fight itself is okay, but man, this Thanos design is awful. It reminds me of 2017 Steppenwolf, but painted gold. We get an amazing scene of the team convincing Drax that the Promise is a lie, and he lets his family go.
I will cherish the time that we had, and not resent the time that we lost.
Man, what a good line. Rocket hates water and being wet. I promise it's more serious than it sounds, as it reminds him of the horrible experiments he went through, but it's a lot simpler than what the other characters have. Him going through water to help save Drax is his big moment, but he doesn't feel like he changes as much as the other characters do. It's good, but not very dramatic stuff. Groot, doesn't really have any issues to work through. He's just a cool dude. Adam Warlock is in this game. The Church and Raker are both being manipulated by an entity called Magus, which is a split persona of Warlocks, and they need Warlock to seal Magus in the Soul Stone, and it's a whole thing. Honestly, I don't care much for Warlock in general. The guy's pretty dull. He's fine enough in this game. I like how he has a very particular manner of speech. The design of his suit is pretty good, though I don't like how his shoulder pads look like they have a smartphone case on them. His little rivalry with Star-Lord was fun, but I'd easily say he's the least important part here, and TBH, I think you could cut him and the Magus stuff entirely. Magus as an antagonist is just kind of whatever. The real antagonist for most of the game is Raker, and he makes perfect sense here as a villain with all the themes this game is going for. Raker is a man who can't move on from the loss of his son. He fails to take responsibility for his own church and plan, blaming Warlock for not helping him and using Nikki as the vessel for the promise instead of himself. Even in his dying breath, he refuses to see the promise for the lie that it is. Raker is an irresponsible, damaged man stuck in the past, the ultimate symbol of everything the Guardians are trying to overcome. It's good stuff. I'm sorry if you expected more detailed discussions of the narrative itself, but I think the story, the actual plot, is just okay. I mean, it's good, but the real highlight is the characters. They're what makes the story work. When I went through this game a second time, I was trying to blast through it as fast as possible, because I had already played it before and I really just wanted to get through it and unlock everything for the purposes of making videos, and yet, there's this bit on Nowhere where the team splits up and you can have an optional conversation with Drax, and without even thinking about it, I found myself going over to him and having that conversation. I like these characters. I want to spend more time with them. I want to hear what they have to say. Some of my favorite parts of this game are just the characters talking to each other. I think it comes down to 3 reasons as to why this gang is so likable. First is how these characters and their interactions with each other feel natural. Even at the beginning, when the team isn't super close, they still feel like they know each other reasonably well. And by the end, their chemistry is infectious. They absolutely feel like a group of ride or die best friends.
Oh, a little bumpy, but we're all okay, right? And we're laughing. That's good.
It's perfect. This is us. This is how we park.
Well, this is how Quill parks anyways.
We were not fated to die this day. Unless, of course, Fin Fang Foom devours us whole.
Secondly, the writing isn't afraid to get serious and touch on more mature and somber subject matter. Much of the game is focused on death and how it affects people, yet it doesn't shy away from these things. The game fully tackles these topics and explores their impact on the characters, who treat these things with the weight they deserve. Thirdly, humor is well utilized and isn't used to undercut serious moments. Gamora's big scene where she reveals that she killed Nebula is the best example of all of this coming together. This is a super serious scene, and jokes are used here, but they don't cancel out the emotions at play. They also feel like natural things these characters would actually say to each other, so they don't feel forced or out of place. Okay, actually there's a fourth thing. Fourthly is the sincerity with which all of this is handled. There's practically no winking to the camera or any real feeling of the, well, isn't this just stupid, sort of like irony that is just drenched in so many modern stories. The characters and story here are sincere. This is seen most clearly in the smaller details of character interactions. Rocket's voice becoming uncharacteristically gentle when asking Star-Lord if he's okay. Gamora looking genuinely offended when Star-Lord laughs at a joke at her expense. I guess this is really just an extension of point 1, but I think it deserves to be said as his own point because it really does sell the humanity and soul of every character involved. This game also features choices and split paths in the narrative. For the most part, the choices you make don't impact the story at all, but there are some decisions that do change things. Most decisions that matter help in the game's final sequence, like how convincing Cosmo and the Nova Corps to help out makes certain sections easier. One that I really like is choosing whether or not to let Gamora go after Raker. If you choose not to go after her, then Gamora will take off one of his arms and his boss fight will be a lot easier. But the reason that I like it is that in order to go after her and stop her from doing that, you have to physically run after her. So I think on a first playthrough, you won't know to do that, so you're probably not going to. You're just gonna go through the section normally and just kind of ignore her, which means that you will get an easier Raker fight on a first playthrough. But on a second playthrough, once you're aware of this, you can choose to go after her and have a harder Raker fight. Pretty smart. Throughout the game, it can be hard to tell which decisions are important and which aren't. I like that though, since on a first playthrough you have to treat every choice like it's important.
Put me
You'll
down!
be fine. Just curl up in a ball.
What?
Drax, not throwing.
No.
Very well.
Peter,
Very well.
You sons of forking jaws!
How will we cross?
Guess that only applies to cats.
One last thing before I wrap up on the story here is that this game does the new suit for the final battle trope, and it does not work at all. My least favorite example of this trope would be Avengers, but Guardians is definitely second place. These things have no build-up at all. Sure, there's an optional note you can find that references them, but within the main narrative there is no mention of these suits prior to this. No reason for them to exist, no reason to feel triumphant in this moment when seeing these suits. They have no significance. And the designs aren't awful, but like, they're not great either. Oh well, but you can take them off as soon as you get them, so it's not too bad. That's all I have to say about the story. It's great, easily the best part of the game, and the best I've ever seen in any superhero game. If you're watching this bit and you haven't played the game, then trust me, play it. Play the game. You will like it. I'll discuss the outfits in more detail in later videos, but I am generally satisfied with the skins in this game. The default looks for the team are really good. They strike a strong balance of keeping things from the movies and comics, while also making them unique. Which sounds like a simple thing to do, but it's actually pretty difficult, and they pulled it off. Pulled it off so well that honestly I'd be fine if this game didn't have any alternate skins at all. The suits adapted from the comics are typically very faithful, to the point that whether a skin looks good or not usually comes down to how good the design was originally and isn't the fault of the game itself. All the comic skins are also credited with the suit's first comic appearance, as well as the creative team behind them. This is awesome, more games should do it. Not just because it shows respect to the original creators, but also because it makes it really easy for uber nerds like me to find the original comic to make videos on them. Every skin also has a description written from the perspective of the character wearing it, which is another nice touch that shows more personality and even a little bit of lore in some cases. Star-Lord definitely had more effort put into his skins than the other characters. It makes sense as he is the only playable character, but it is a little disappointing that he has 13 suits while everyone else only has 8. My biggest issue with the skins would definitely be the way you unlock them. You have to find them in the missions. They're usually tucked away somewhere, so you really have to look for them. While I am grateful that I don't have to pay extra money for them, I still don't like this too much either. For both of my playthroughs, I went through the game phone in hand, open to a guide for the costume locations because I really didn't want to miss one and then have to play a whole mission over again just to get it. This made getting the damn things kind of stressful and I didn't like it. Unfortunately, I do have to mention that this game is a bit buggy. I didn't encounter too many bugs, but I did encounter enough that I felt I had to mention it. Most bugs are harmless visual ones, like Star-Lord's jet boosters being on permanently, or his visor not coming up in combat, or refusing to come off during cutscenes. Like I said, these are harmless, and they can be fixed by a simple reset. I did have one moment though where the game just froze. I was able to enter the pause menu, but not able to do anything else. So again, not super buggy, no huge game-breaking glitches, but expect a few bumps on the road. So yeah, that's Guardians of the Galaxy. A truly fantastic game that didn't get the recognition it deserved. And the reason for that is pretty simple. Avengers. Avengers killed any chance this game had at being huge. People thought the games looked similar, that they were in the same universe, and that they were made by the same people, so that just doomed Guardians, even though none of that was true. I mean, technically they were made by the same people, since the games share the publisher of Square Enix, and Eidos Montreal, the developers of Guardians, did work on Avengers, but they weren't the lead developers of that game, which was Crystal Dynamics. Eidos only helped out on Avengers, and I don't think they provided any assistance once the game actually launched. But none of that mattered to most people. Avengers poisoned the well so thoroughly that no one wanted anything to do with Guardians. Which is a shame, since this game was really good. It would be awesome to get a sequel that continues this team's adventures and iron out some of the issues, even though that will unfortunately never happen. If you're a fan of narrative-focused games and the superhero sci-fi genre, then I highly recommend 2021's Guardians of the Galaxy. Next video is on Marvel Rivals.